Good afternoon. We're going to start. Good afternoon and welcome. This is the first joint Envi-DEVE committee meeting on the progress we are making on the UN high-level the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm very much welcoming Commissioner Mimica, who will inform us as a joint committee on the progress being made. And just more for the housekeeping, which is important. What we will do is because the Commissioner has until 6 o'clock, so this means we have to be a bit efficient, so we will all try to do so. So what we are doing is that we are doing a catch the eye, so everyone that wants to raise a question has to raise the flag, so to say, so that we know who wants to ask a question, and we will make a list for that. And we hope that everyone can get its turn, but of course it depends on how much interest there is, because according to our estimation, we will have time for 15 or 16 questions. Everyone will have 1 minute for that, so prepare a question for 1 minute so that we really have an efficient time to do that. As I said, this is the first one that we are jointly engaging in monitoring the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the delivery of the 2030 agenda. In February, our two committees already organized a public hearing where Commissioner First Vice President Timmermans presented the Commission's reflection paper, and where we also heard about the preparation of the Global Sustainable Development Report, as well as the setup of each member state in a concrete delivery of each SDG, Sustainable Development Goal. Following this hearing, the House, the European Parliament, has adopted a resolution in March 2018, so this year, on the SDGs, in which it clearly favors the first scenario set out in the reflection paper of the Commission for how the EU might take forward the SDGs, meaning that the Commission should propose an overarching strategy for the implementation of the SDGs by the EU and the Member States, including external and internal policies. So we are very much looking forward to your presentation, Commissioner. But I first would like to give the floor now to my dear colleague, Mr. Thomas Tobé, the Chair of the Committee on Development.
Thank you, Mr. Eickhout, and I also would like to say that I think it's really nice that we can start this parliamentary term to have both committees that actually work on sustainable development, that we can do this together, and of course to have the Commissioner present. I think I would also take the opportunity to say that I think it's important for our two committees to also show leadership within the European Parliament to make sure that the SDGs are fully implemented to the European policies. As you know, the UN Secretary General underlined that despite the progress that we see in the number of areas in the past 4 years, on some of the goals, progress has been slow or even reversed. In September, world leaders will need to reflect on these challenges when they meet for the first SDG summit since 2015. Our two committees will also attend the summit. But therefore, I'm very pleased that Commissioner Mimica, who was the HLPF last week, present a year review with us today. This review notably includes the joint synthesis report on supporting the Sustainable Development Goals across the world. It is a joint report because it highlights action both by the Member States and the EU in support of developing countries' efforts to reach the SDGs. So, may I ask Commissioner Mimica to brief us on the meeting and the preparation on the SDG summit in September. Commissioner Mimica, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed, chairs. Very good afternoon, honorable members, and very warm welcome at the beginning of the new parliamentary season to all of the members of the DEVE and ENVI committees, especially to new ones, and equally warm welcome back to many familiar friends among you. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is one of the most important topics your two committees will address in the coming years. I hope I can provide a useful overview from last week's high-level political forum and help prepare for the SDG summit in September in New York, when the forum meets again at the level of heads of state and government. The 2030 Agenda represents a major shift in the way we approach development because of its universality and broad scope. It transcends the issue of poverty eradication to cover all aspects of sustainable development, social, economic, and environmental. And it applies to all countries, including to the European Union and our member states. The European Union played a major role in devising the agenda, and we remain determined to make every effort to promote its implementation at home and across the world. This year marks the end of the first four-year cycle of the Forum, and in September, a review of its functioning will be launched. Last week's meeting helped to set the scene for September, with the European Union playing a prominent and constructive role. One positive sign was that the draft political declaration, the main output for the September summit, was agreed in principle by all UN member states already before the July forum. This was not a given in view of the challenges we often had in the past to reach agreed outcomes and the increasing pressure under which the multilateral system is at the moment. The European Union had a major hand in shaping the document. It is a focus text containing useful language on some of our key priorities on gender, human rights, environment and climate, policy coherence, multilateralism, and data monitoring and evaluation. We want to use this commonly agreed declaration to promote faster action on the Sustainable Development Goals over the coming months and years. And I hope you, the European Parliament, can help us in that. The United Nations, in fact, aim to launch a decade of action on the goals in September. In the statement I delivered on behalf of the European Union and its member states at the plenary, I stressed that our commitment to the 2030 Agenda remains unwavering. The fact that 26 out of our 28 member states have already presented voluntary national reviews is a testament to that. Importantly, for the first time, the European Union as a whole presented our own review of progress. Commissioner Vella and I co-hosted a side event together with the Finnish presidency of the Council to highlight the steps taken by the European Union and the member states to implement the SDGs both internally and externally. One thing was evident from the start. The world expects us to be in the lead. To be in the lead of global efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda. The event generated very strong interest and drew high praise from many sides, included by the United Nations Deputy Secretary General. We were able to make a convincing case for Europe as a trailblazer in sustainable development, based on important recent EU documents. Firstly, the reflection paper towards a sustainable Europe 2030, which we published in January this year, which sets out key priorities for moving forward with the EU's sustainability transition and developing a fully circular economy, creating a sustainable food system, greening energy and mobility, reinforcing the European pillar of social rights, and gearing all our horizontal policy tools, from education and digitalization to finance and taxation, towards this objective. Secondly, there is a third SDG progress report published by Eurostat in June, which confirmed that the European Union has made progress towards almost all goals, albeit in some slower than others. Notably, when it comes to some of the environmental goals, greater efforts are needed. And thirdly, the 2019 report on policy coherence for development complements this picture, outlining how European Union policies take into account the potential impact on developing countries. And finally, the first ever joint synthesis report on the implementation of the 2017 European Consensus on Development. It provided an overview of the efforts of the European Union and its member states in support of SDGs implementation in developing countries, in our partner countries. The consensus has been widely recognized as a crucial contribution to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda globally. And I'm grateful to the European Parliament for having worked hand in hand with us and the Council to make it possible. It has spurred innovative new actions such as our Africa-Europe Alliance for Sustainable Investments and Jobs and our External Investment Plan, set to leverage 44 billion euros of new investments in Africa and the European Union neighbourhood by 2020, and possibly 10 times as much under our next multi-annual financing framework. It has been the basis for a new way of working with partners, including with multilateral organizations, and in particular with the United Nations, as demonstrated by our 500 million euros Spotlight initiative to end all forms of violence against women and girls. Examples like these resonated directly with the stakeholders present at our side event, including with representatives from the civil society, private sector, and academia. But the message was clear: to be truly influential in pushing for the implementation of the SDGs internationally, we must be able to show that we are implementing them very actively by ourselves at home. And when it comes to sustainable development, to reaching the sustainability of development, we are all developing countries. We all have a work to do. This means stepping up positive action to further embed sustainability across the EU's portfolios. Addressing this Parliament last week, Commission's President-elect Ursula von der Leyen highlighted the importance she intends to give to the Sustainable Development Goals by refocusing the European semester to make sure we stay on track. It is a very encouraging proposition, and one of which I hope the European Parliament will be a vocal supporter. Externally, we need to make the positive momentum towards the new financial instrument for international cooperation and development and in our future programming. The European Union is the world's biggest development actor, providing almost 75 billion euros of official development assistance last year, and that is almost 60% of all global ODA in the world. The EU and its member states, we are really the biggest global development actor. And the official development assistance remains our strong development financing instrument, especially in global poverty eradication, and especially in least developed countries and in fragile contexts. But our contribution to the SDG agenda is no longer only ODA-centered. We are increasingly working on forging an effective mix of aid, private investment, and domestic resources in our financing for development modalities. And most importantly, we don't aspire to be only the biggest development actor in the world. We aspire to be the best one. And being the best means partnering with all other development stakeholders in implementing the 2030 SDG agenda. We shall stay strong, if not the strongest on the global level, on keeping our development and climate action closely aligned with human rights-based approach, also aligned on human development engagement, on policy coherence for development, on coherence between our development, humanitarian, migration, and peace and security policies. In the margins of the high-level political forum, we discussed with partners ways to accelerate SDG implementation, focusing on national planning, financing, and monitoring. We are working to promote the concept of integrated national financing frameworks, to mobilize resources of all types, private and public, domestic and international, and to align them with SDGs implementation. High-level political forum also provided me with the opportunity to hold a series of bilateral meetings, for instance, with both the outgoing and incoming directors generals of the Food and Agriculture Organization, and to convey the European Union's perspective at a series of side events. I would like to highlight the successful event we co-hosted with the governments of France, Spain, and Mexico on the links between inequality and climate change. It allowed to showcase the European Union's commitment to tackling inequality in all its dimensions, building on this year's European Development Days. This is an issue of which I hope the Parliament will continue to focus during this legislature. Honourable members, we clearly have a huge and hugely important task ahead of us. The new Parliament and the new Commission are important opportunities to accelerate the European Union's work on the Sustainable Development Goals. I welcome the efforts of both committees in the previous parliamentary session to mainstream the 2030 agenda more widely through the Parliament and hope this work continues. We in the Commission look forward to working closely with you in coming months and years, and I personally look forward to seeing many of you in September for the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we now do our first round of questions. As I said, it's 1 minute each so that we can have as many questions as possible. So the first one would be my colleague, Mr. Buzoy, on behalf of EPP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear Commissioner, thank you very much. As it was already said, SDGs are not an objective in themselves, but they will help us to improve the world. Among the 17 goals, I would concentrate on goal number 3, where it's related directly to health. Here, of course, we are doing better than other regions in the world, but even at the world level, some important progresses were made in the last years. Less death in child, many due to vaccination, also maternal mortality fallen, the incidence of HIV fallen also due to the antiretroviral therapy, which change in good many parts of the world. Tuberculosis, malaria incidence are less, but still tuberculosis is a problem. It is not only in other continents, but even in some countries from the Central East Europe and in the south of Europe. My question is, first, we should improve also our objectives and we should improve our situation, but how we can contribute to achieve the goal number 3 worldwide? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Second question on behalf of S&D, Mr. Buhlmann.
Chairman, Commissioner Mimica, please allow me to thank you for all what you did, because I think the whole Parliament is grateful for the way in which you pushed forward for the UN SDGs, and you gave us today again a lesson of what is to be done in the forthcoming months and years. Let me pick on one question. We are in the middle of a holistic exercise. And if we look to our foreign policies, trade, development policies, where we bring together different elements of political spheres, agriculture, environment, social policies, economic policies, how can we link all our attempts to improve the situation with the crucial question of inequality, which you rightly mentioned? Inequality is the main obstacle, in our view, against empowerment of people and ownership for the better. So give us an advice, give us some hints, some ideas of what we can do to better monitor and to improve our policies.
Thank you. Next question on behalf of Renew, Madam Rodriguez Ramos.
Microphone for the speaker, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for your presentation. I'd just like to point out the fact that the SDG agenda is an ambitious one, with a clear shift of focus in mind. And as such, I think the European Union, the European Commission, should take up this leadership right to the end. And crucially, we need to be able to set out a clear agenda for indicators and reference values, which are objectives, so that between now and 2030, we can have impact assessments carried out to make sure that before the deadline, we know how we need to redefine our policies and pursue new policies, and indeed rechannel funding for that. If we manage to achieve the SDGs, and if that's going to happen, we need to increase the budget. We've seen this in the environment area. We need 25% more funding there. But we also need to show leadership in development countries to make sure that they are freeing up the funds. Because if we don't see more funds pouring in, then the development countries will not be able to achieve the SDGs by the deadline. And as such, I think European leadership can be used, or should be used, to galvanize the developing countries and the countries that we work with to get the funds available as well.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, Madame Toussaint.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you very much, Chair. Well, Commissioner, the report presented does show that the objectives for sustainable development will not be achieved. Now, the two issues are linked because we know that environmental degradation is something which, of course, hits those who are in a more precarious state. And you see that you have millions of victims in Mozambique this year, $3 billion wasted, and this is just a drop in the ocean, basically, as concerns worldwide needs. But we have to look at who is responsible. We have an ecological debt. We're just turning our back on climate change. Now, you've underscored that we need to have additional financing made available, and that should come from the state, but also from applying the polluter pays principle. And you have 25 companies who, in fact, are responsible for 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that the mechanism is not working. And those that are responsible for environmental pollution basically would need to put into the common pot. We need to act, therefore, and have some sort of coherence and integrated policy for sustainable development within our European governments, and also to introduce certain limits which would be applied in a coherent fashion for the protection of the planet, and to have additional funds earmarked for this purpose, but also to have the right sort of norms in place there too. Thank you.
On behalf of ID, Madame Grisset. ID Grisset. Not. No? Okay, then we move on to, on behalf of ECR, Madam Kemka.
Dziękuję. Panie komisarzu.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now, you have talked about the SDGs, and this, of course, is a major challenge because we do have 14 targets and 169 tasks which have to be tackled. And it's true to say that national parliaments and the European Parliament should work together in order to achieve anything. In other words, an integrated approach is necessary because of our multi-sectoral approach. And also civil society has to play in as well. We need, therefore, to have the right sort of monitoring in place. We do need to have an evaluation of any progress made. And that is necessary in order to make sure that national strategies can be improved there too, on all levels. So my question, as to the future European Commission, are you going to look at the gaps in the strategy? Are you going to also look at the inconsistencies? It's a matter of strategy to 2030, and it's also a matter of statistical data being collected. So we do need to have a complex strategy in order to make sure that the 2030 agenda really is achieved in time.
Everyone is aware, everyone is on the list, but I try to do a bit according to the group size, according to Envy and DEVE, and also gender balance. But everyone is on the list and everyone will get its turn. So don't get too nervous if you're not immediately being mentioned. Now on behalf of GUE, Mr. Kokales.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. In this climate action in New York, in the Climate Action Summit, the EU must exhibit the global leadership in ambition and action. And the SDGs are inseparable from their sister agreement, the Paris Accord. They are actually the political program for a just and inclusive, a rapid and orderly transition to a carbon-neutral economy. Therefore, the question is how and when are we going to implement the March 2019 European Parliament resolution and let the SDGs become our compass and map, and thus determine the strategic framework for the EU and the member states, including their use as measured by Eurostat as indicator benchmarks and common targets for the next MFF. Indeed, if we are to achieve the SDGs and cut our emissions in half in the next 11 years, we should establish a new climate transition structural fund in the next MFF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Insir.
So now, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Mimica, for being here to discuss the implementation of 2030 agenda. And as you also pointed out, it's for many of us, it's the first meeting, and it feels very good to start with a discussion on such an important topic. And as you also expressed, the EU needs to take on a leadership or leading role and show that we are serious with implementing both the SDGs on one hand, but also, of course, the Paris Agreement, and both within the EU and in our external policies. Before I had the honor of being elected as MEP in this parliament, I was working with international development cooperation, among other things, and with the SDGs. My experience is from the field is that there are sometimes parallel process within the same focus without much coordination from the side of the EU and from the side of the member states. Therefore, firstly, I wonder if you could expand a bit on the effort of joint programming and how you see these efforts developing. Secondly, I wonder how you look at the potential to strengthen the right-based approach in our development policies. For example, how can the EU become better at promoting gender equality, not the least in regards to the September summit? And finally, I wonder in which way the EU can become better at promoting decent work and social dialogue as a part of reducing the inequalities that Udo Bullmann, my colleague, previously well expressed, between the inequalities, of course, between the people and between the regions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And the last one of this round, Mr.
Thank you. I have a very simple question. The Commission, does it have an ex-ante evaluation at its disposal as concerns the impact of the Mercosur agreement, which has just been negotiated as concerns durable, sustainable development objectives?
That was a very concise question. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Commissioner, if you can answer the questions in an equally concise manner, that would be very much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much for your questions and your comments and your contributions by your questions to the overall work that is in front of us of making European Union the major contributor in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. There were questions more specific, more general, but let us try to start with some specific questions first on the implementation of the goal, Sustainable Development Goal 3, on a health. Actually, our contribution to the overall human development, health of course included, education, health, is already a part of our national indicative programs and development envelopes, where we work a lot and would like to even increase that engagement along the two tracks. One is strengthening the health system at a country level, at a partner country level. And the second track is supporting financially and policy-wise, supporting the vertical global initiatives that are like Global Fund for malaria, fighting malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, or Gavi immunization initiatives. So by combining the two horizontal health initiatives to improve the health system's responses to the health needs, and by supporting the concrete disease-related global actions, we think that we really could contribute a lot to human capital development, to health systems development in the period to come. On inequality, I definitely agree that this is an overarching issue that actually could either be a driver of the development actions, or could substantially diminish the positive impact that development cooperation could have on a global sustainable development goals agenda. So therefore, we should in the future be, let us say, more focused and more precise even in our inequality-related actions. Yes, we have an overall goal that comes out from the global SDG agenda, and this is leaving no one behind. This is a bit, I would say, watered down definition of the inequalities or fighting inequalities goals. So by combining leaving no one behind and our stronger action on inequalities, we really could give additional boost to the SDGs implementation. My vision at this point, maybe it's too late to have a concrete plan for a commissioner that will leave the office in 3 months' time. But I would like to see our development policy develop in a direction that we somehow evolve to the level of having inequalities indicators, something similar that we have for gender-related actions, where we could assess easily, monitor and assess to what extent each and every development project contributes to inequality, to decreasing the inequalities in societies in our partner countries. We have it for gender action. There was also a question on how we can make our gender action more impactful. And I would like to tell you that under our gender action plan, we have put a clear goal that at least 85% of all of our development projects must be gender relevant. We are now closing to 70% of our development actions to be gender relevant, and we would like to somehow to see it similarly in the inequality area. Monitoring in general and improving the accountability of our development action is important part of the overall Sustainable Development Goals implementation. It's no longer time to count money we put into the development projects. We really have to turn from input to output, to counting and focusing on what we get out of our development projects. In that context, the outcome of development cooperation is and will be more and more important part of our development policy and our contribution to the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, the European Union will be, and I'm confident that we shall continue to be the strongest global actor in development policy. This will be reflected, hopefully, with your understanding, with your recognition, with your contribution. This will be reflected in the next MFF, because what the European Commission has proposed is an increase of almost 30% for all external actions, including development cooperation. So having better capacity to be the global leader in development funding goes line in line with our responsibility to find the best way of monitoring, of keeping the accountability of our development actions. Of course, there could be, and there are, sometimes gaps in our strategies, sometimes overlapping in our strategy, especially having in mind that there are 28 member states and European budget or European instruments that are contributing to Sustainable Development Goals implementation. Therefore, we already started during this last or this still current MFF. We started with a better joint programming exercise. We do it now in almost 40 countries in order with our member states, but also with some of third countries as well, like with Australia, sometimes Norway, Canada, Japan, US as well. So in a future MFF and in the implementation of a Sustainable Development Goal, this joint programming will be even more and more relevant and important. On a link between SDGs and Paris Agreement and between the Sustainable Development Goals and climate action, we don't have to say much more than the fact, to point out the fact that the overall concept of Sustainable Development Goal is about sustainability, about including environmental concerns, climate concerns into development actions. And this is what we shall do under our consensus for development. And this consensus for development, actually somebody might even look at it as our strategy for implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal. But I fully understand the call that comes from, especially from the Parliament and from the civil society as well, that the European Union should develop even more concrete, more detailed strategy of implementation of development goals, more concrete than the consensus, European consensus for development is. So I see that this should be the direction of travel for the next Commission, indeed. That is part of the answers, I hope. On Mercosur, we have, as in all of our free trade agreements, negotiations, we do the impact assessments beforehand, ex ante. And this has been done also for the free trade agreement with Mercosur. Actually, two sustainable or sustainability impact assessments have been done, and one internal, one external assessment, and all of them shows the gains, even sustainable gains that would come from this big, even the biggest free trade agreement that we have ever concluded. And it's not only big in terms of a volume of trade that it covers, but also it is big in terms of innovative parts of the agreement and standards that are covered by Mercosur agreement.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. We go on then with more questions from members, and first from EPP, Mairead McGuinness.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, colleagues. Just an observation, I'm glad you reminded us that the goals also refer to the European Union, because we have a habit of putting them offshore, if you like. My second observation and question relates to sustainable agriculture and food security and nutrition, because the FAO report is quite grim on those findings as to the lack of progress being made on those issues. And I've just managed to read part of their report. And I think one of the issues they highlight is that there is a reduction in public investment in agriculture. And I wonder, is the European Union, are we doing sufficient in the developing world to support agriculture? Because it points to the problem for small-scale farmers not having the resources. And I think research and knowledge transfer that is appropriate to the regions is what is really needed. And are we doing enough there? Because this FAO report itself is saying that their findings are grim. And I think that's very disappointing 4 years down the road.
Thank you. And then from S&D, Monica Gonzalez.
Microphone for the speaker, please. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Thank you to you, Commissioner. And I'm here in this committee to talk about the passionate subject of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. And I know that you've done a lot of work since 2014 to move ahead with things like the European Investment Plan for Africa, which has seen an investment of 44 million euros. But the Commission, I know, has been a little bit slow in terms of integrating the SDGs into the public agenda of the Commission. But I agree with you that the European Parliament now needs to develop more concrete proposals than what has been covered in the consensus that was adopted by the Council and Parliament and the Commission in 2017. The European Union now needs to show leadership to push back against this attack on multilateralism that we're seeing from Russia and the USA. And we need to lead on three concrete issues. First of all, reducing inequality. Obviously, gender equality is key to sustainable development and is at the heart of European Union values. And there's the Spotlight initiative that you led that is very important amongst others, but we mustn't forget the cross-cutting nature of this, and the importance of integrating the idea of diversity and LGBTI rights and inabilities. And then secondly, it's the issue of cross-cutting policies. We need to create links with local actors and NGOs and local authorities at regional and local level. And thirdly, we need to have a fair transition to be able to promote environmental transitioning in vulnerable areas of the world. In Latin America, well, that's important, but then there's, of course, Africa as well, which is, not at all responsible for climate change, but being hardest hit by it. Last year, we adopted, and I think the European Union was a very important player when it comes to the refugee plan globally, but our colleague Enrique Guerrero spoke on a number of occasions of the importance of regulating this climate change issue. So my question is then, what can we do before the end of your mandate to come up with a concrete proposal to regulate the issue of climate refugees? We're at a key point in history now, and this issue needs to be resolved before the end of this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. We try to keep in within 1 minute. From Renew, Catherine Chabot.
Excusez-moi, je sais pas.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I'm happy to see this meeting take place because we have both committees participating here. I have a general question. I am a newly elected MEP, so I do share the ambition of the Commission today, but I'm just wondering, why is it that the SDGs are being drawn up? Why not under the Paris Agreement or because of the strategy in terms of what the Commission intends to do? How is it that we can really make sure that we do dovetail and align all of those strategies in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Then from ECR, Anna Zalewska.
Panie komisarzu, stwierdził pan, że chcemy być...
Now, of course, as an EU, we want to have sustainable development achieved in the best manner possible. However, in order to do that, we really must be eager on this. I think that good examples and best practice can be thrown up in order to show what can be done and thereby be more specific in terms of future planning and as to what needs to be done. Now, you, Commissioner, participated in the preparations for the future budget. Where are the priorities proposed therein? Because I think that a lot of priorities seem to be mutually exclusive. And if you think of agriculture, for example, we cannot accept less money being earmarked for agriculture. You need to have more funds put into that sector. Can I have an answer to that, please?
Thank you. From ID, Dominique Bilde.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire, pour vos explications.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those explanations. Of course, the SDGs are important, but what we contest is that they be integrated under the European semester, because the member states over time will lose all autonomy, in particular when it comes to energy policy, where the EU is going for renewable energy without reservations, even though we know that wind energy it can be particularly irksome. If you look at Eurostat statistics, then one realizes that the devil is in the detail. It is interesting to note that the report presents trade growth with developing countries as a positive, but in fact those countries include China, and they practice massive dumping vis-à-vis our industry. Then there's imports from the least developed countries, including some French-speaking countries, and those imports only account for 2% of the total. And the report also points to the fact that China has an increasing influence on the African continent. and 25% of their trade is done with China, and therefore they've overtaken the EU. So how can we make sure that they depend less on China and that the African continent doesn't become theirs?
Rory Palmer.
Thank you. By this time tomorrow, one of our member states will have a new Prime Minister. A new Prime Minister who has spoken about closing down the UK's Department of International Development, who has talked about reducing drastically the UK's international aid budget, who has spoken about realigning the UK's international aid and development policy to support commercial interests and not exclusively the eradication of poverty and the delivery of sustainable development around the world. I think this is a big moment for people who care about multilateralism, internationalism and the global effort to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. So, Commissioner, perhaps if you had a message for incoming Prime Minister Johnson this evening, what might that message be?
Thank you. From Renew, Martin Howard.
Thank you. And Commissioner, I'm very pleased that you talked a lot about monitoring, which is a bit boring, but it's very important if these high-level political forums are really to understand whether the Sustainable Development Goals and their 230 indicators are actually being met or not. And we in the wealthiest countries are very used to whole population data and to the sophisticated manipulation of data. But worldwide, it is the poorest people who are the most likely to be excluded altogether from official data. And if you look at the poorest 20%, surveys suggest that nearly half of their children under 5 do not even have their births registered, the most basic piece of information, leading to later problems of legal identity, of the protection of rights, of access to healthcare, and we can then never be sure if the poorest are being left behind or not. So my question is really whether the Commission and the European Union will invest in civil registration and administrative data systems to make sure that the poorest and most vulnerable are not invisible in this whole process.
Thank you. And then the last question to Eleonora Evi.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I'm over here. First of all, thank you for all of the work you've done up until now during your mandate. I would reiterate a request made by other colleagues, which was also the subject of a resolution by this Parliament during the previous legislature, which is in relation to the global strategy to implement the Agenda 2030, so that it includes clear measures, clear deadlines, so that basically some kind of monitoring system, some kind of measurement tool be included in the entire setup. A state-of-the-art measuring tool is what the Parliament called for during the previous legislature. Now, you touched upon it today in your address, but I think we're at a crossroads. I think this EU really needs to put in place this global strategy and implement it properly. And the previous speaker mentioned children. What children are experiencing within and outside the EU is horrendous. There's a high mortality rate still within the EU, and that's even higher outside of the EU, and there are 37 countries which have made insufficient progress in achieving the SDGs. That's at least what a UNICEF report refers to, and 500 million children live in countries and grow up in countries where there's a chronic lack of data. That's the point made by the previous speaker, and I'd like to know what the Commission is going to do about it.
Thank you, and thank you all members for the question. Now I'll give the floor to the Commissioner.
Yes, going from the first question to the rest of them. Yes, indeed, since several decades, the hunger in the world has been on decrease, but unfortunately, since 2015, there is, as FAO report shows, the hunger is on rise. In spite of the really big efforts, not only by the European Union, but also with the international community to focus on food security and nutrition issues. We have engaged during this current MFF over 8 billion euros over food-related programs, and we really intend to continue even stronger and even more focused together with our partners in FAO and other in member states and other stakeholders. We do hope that with a new budget, EU budget, with an increased at least 30% increase overall external action and development actions, this could also be turned into higher engagement in a food-related and nutrition-related program. So therefore, definitely the area of food and agriculture will stay high on the priority lists of the sectors where the European development intervention will contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals implementation. On repeatedly mentioned need to strengthen the link between the climate change action and development action, I would like just to draw your attention to the fact that, as I already mentioned, we are working now and we shall continue working with the member states on their national development plans, their integrated development plans for each and every country, but not in isolation of other policy that really need coherence for development. Therefore, we shall insist very much on bringing together national, meaning our partner countries' national development strategies with their national determined contributions to climate change. This is for us an integrated approach, bringing together development commitments and climate commitments at a national level. In general, we shall increase our development support to our development partners. We proposed the target of 25% of overall development actions to be climate relevant. It's up to this Parliament, it's up to the Member States, it's up to the Commission to finalize the target level. 25% might be low, might be high. I don't think it's high, to the contrary. So this is another area where we have to really combine our climate and development world. On energy, on renewable energy, we shall definitely stay committed to support renewable energy development across the world. We shall not fund by our development cooperation project any other source of energy, of electricity, other than renewable ones. We have so-called big bets to have at least 40 million people to increase access to energy, to renewable energy, for at least 40 million people, to build at least 6.5 gigawatts of renewable energy sources, and to decrease by 15 million tons of CO2 emissions by our renewable energy projects by 2020. So all these renewable energy goal will remain strong in our development policy. I agree that there might be some of the devils hidden in details, but we are ready to work on taking them out of any hidden agenda when it comes to sustainable renewable energy, and that will definitely stay at the core of our development action. On China, it is a bit of a longer story that I would like to share with you just briefly. Actually, I would not like to downplay the role, the impact, the way how China is doing development contribution, development policy, especially in Africa. But it is a fact that so far, still, European Union, Europe, member states, and the European Union, we are by far the biggest development partner for Africa, the biggest investment partner for Africa, the biggest trade partner for Africa. For instance, in investments, we are 40% of the foreign direct investments in Africa. China is at 5%. Still, though this let us say, snapshot picture should not be taken as a proof that we are the best and that nothing would change in that area. Therefore, what we have already started in the development dialogue with China is to find a way, at least at some of the pilot programs in pilot countries, to see whether is it possible to, let us say, to have more complementary development projects and development impact rather than confrontational approach to the modalities of doing development projects. We are not yet there. We did not agree on a concrete at least 3 pilot countries, but this is a way how we would like to see whether we could work more in compliance and less in competition when it comes to development impact, especially in Africa. Yes, on many aspects, digital for development is important and is getting more and more important for our real contribution to development, to sustainable development development goals implementation. Therefore, we have a special agreed program of bringing more digital into our development projects in order, among others, to enable the better coverage of civil registry across Africa, especially Africa, and in West Africa. There is already ongoing strong work on updating and digitalization of civil registers in West Africa. So if we proceed along these lines, I think that this could be a big contribution, not only for a civil register, but also for the technical and technological advancement and leapfrogging for African industries and job creation in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for the answers to the members' questions. And of course, there are important times now. I do know that the Commissioner has to leave the meeting now. Doesn't mean that you all have the opportunity to leave. We have more to do here today. But I would like to say to the Commissioner that, of course, in the Parliament now, we will prepare ourselves. It would be nice to see you also in New York for the summit. But also we need to find our structured way in how to implement the SDGs further on. But thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you. Yes, we also at this meeting have the pleasure to also invite further comments for the members' questions. We have Rafael Maure Prezioni from the DG Climate, and we also have Christian Leffler, who is Deputy Manager Director of EAS, also attending this meeting. So I will give you the floor now to give further comments that you would like to add to what the Commissioner already has said in his statements. So first I give the floor to Rafael Maurice Prezioni.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Just one very brief point, which goes to one of the answers that the Commissioner...
Sorry, can you move out there? DG, from DG Climate would like to speak, and we need to have a visual.
Okay. Is that in order now? Okay, a brief point on the development model that we are offering developing countries. I think the paradigm of our development offer is virtually dead. The old paradigm was that we were helping developing countries to develop like us. I think our own development model is backfiring in climate terms, as we know. What we are offering now, however, isn't entirely proven. And that's one of the paradoxes of our development policy. In order to strengthen the credibility of our development policy, we need to strengthen the changes in our own economic development model. The example of renewables is a very good one. If we are now able to persuade developing countries that with our help they should invest in renewable energy, is because we have invested in renewable energies and we have proven that they work. At the same time, it's going to be very difficult to persuade 800 million of Africans without access to energy to go straight for renewables and leapfrog fossil fuels if we continue to burn coal and if we don't develop renewables more. And we know that our development model will not be changed overnight. We have a plan to change it. We're now debating how to enhance that plan, and I'm not suggesting that we should do nothing in developing countries until we fix our own house. But we have to be aware that there is an issue and the developing countries do perceive this contradiction, and that makes the situation much more difficult. I think we have to be aware of that.
Thank you. Then I give the floor to Mr. Christian Leffler.
Thank you very much. As I say, building on what Mauro Petricciona has just said, which I fully subscribe to, and maybe in reply to one or two of the remarks that the honourable members made, I think we've come quite a long way already in integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into our policies, internally and externally. I can, of course, speak mainly on the external side. And on that external side, I'd say the two key frameworks that we have developed, one of them very much with the support and guidance of the European Parliament, is the Consensus for Development, where the renewal of the consensus a few years ago explicitly based itself on the SDGs as the overall policy framework for our future external cooperation. And the second framework is the EU Global Strategy on Foreign and Security Policy. And that may seem at first somewhat surprising that a document that looks primarily at the security and well-being of Europe and European citizens also has a very strong SDG focus, but it shouldn't be surprising because that is the overall global framework within which we work, and it's very clear that stability, security and prosperity elsewhere in the world is the best recipe for that security and well-being in Europe as well. We're very glad to see
today's joint session of Envy and DEVE, because it reflects in many ways also the so-called wedding cake model of the SDGs, where you see a solid base where you have the biosphere, the climate, the environment, the oceans. If we do not look after them, everything else we do will go to naught. So we need to make sure that all our policies, internal and external in how we cooperate with others around the world, in pure cooperation or in development cooperation, that they support our objectives on climate change as well. That is why in the proposals under the new financial framework for the external cooperation instrument, we put a strong emphasis on the climate goals as a target for that assistance. And it's been, I should say, a pleasant surprise to us in the institutions that both this Parliament and the Council, the Member States, have indicated that they want to go even further in strengthening that climate dimension of our external cooperation. To accompany these efforts, and in very close cooperation with our colleagues in DG Environment, DG Climate Change, Environment and Climate Change for that matter, in the Commission, we have developed over the last few years an active climate diplomacy plan, an action plan that we then work with Member States to implement. We're now in the 4th generation of that to make sure that we reach out to partners around the world before and after every annual COP meeting on climate change to see how we can further the objectives of the Paris Agreement and make sure that we integrate them in our cooperation with these partners. That's why we also put a lot of emphasis on the strengthening of the UN system, the UN development system, and on development finance in the UN context as essential elements to make sure that through our cooperation we can achieve the ambitious targets that were set in the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that statement, and I don't see any hands with further questions. And then I will... What? Oh, yeah, okay. No, you should do the conclusion. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we have to keep the cooperation between the committees now, so we will have some conclusion now from the Envy chair, and then I will end the meeting. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. For me, it was all fine that you would take the ride home now. So no, I think the only thing that I can say is that we really need to keep up this progress, and that's especially the summit in New York is going to be of vital importance. And we know that there will be a delegation going to there, and there will be a consultative meeting of that delegation at the beginning of September. And I think it's going to be very important to make sure that in New York we are going to take the next steps in this process. And I think something that also Mary McGuinness was reminding ourselves of again and again, these Sustainable Development Goals are not only for developing countries, but they are also for ourselves. And I think that is something that we have to keep on reminding ourselves, because sometimes it's too easy to look to the outside, whereas there's a lot of homework also for the European Union and its member states to be done, and that's also why we are pushing so much the implementation of SDGs also within the EU. And with that, I can only say from an Envy perspective, I know that my DEVE colleagues still need to have meetings also tomorrow. I can say that my Envy colleagues close their meeting, and we will reconvene as Envy in September, again, the 4th of September.
Perfect. So let me remind the members of DEVE, we see each other at 9 o'clock tomorrow. We have a very packed agenda. To the colleagues of Envy, enjoy your summer break, and then we end this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.